The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Oshkosh Diaries. I'm Paul Esslinger, joined by co-host Derek Kloiber. When Derek and I put a show together, we talked to the person that we're going to talk to, and we asked them what they want to talk about during the show, and then Derek and I kind of put the show together. And we knew very early on when we had this concept for the show that we wanted to have the guests that we had today. And Derek, Ida, and Ian, my co-host here and the other production crew said we really need to have two shows with this guest that we're going to have today. And I was a bit reluctant to do that because I didn't want the appearance to have one guest be, quote, more important than another guest. But I met with the guest that we have today a few days ago, and the materials and the conversation that I had with him, it was just really kind of overwhelming. So we decided that we will have two shows with the guest today. The first show will be centered on him growing up in Oshkosh. We'll spend about 20 minutes on that. Then we'll talk to him about the Bloody 6th Ward in Oshkosh for the remainder of the show. And then for the second show, we'll continue talking about the Bloody 6th for a little bit. Then we're going to shift over to his time over in World War II, his exploits there. And then we're going to finish up on his expertise with the Oshkosh Corporation, better known as Oshkosh Truck. The terms legend and hero often, in my opinion, kind of get thrown around recklessly in today's society. I think a legend is someone who is revered by his or her particular area of expertise or discipline. And our guest, in my opinion, is a legend. He's a legend in the historical community in Oshkosh, and a legend at the Oshkosh Corporation because of his many years of employment there. And I think a hero is someone who puts his or her life on the line to save someone or to serve a cause knowing that they could be killed doing so. The gentleman that we have here this evening put his life on the line, serving our country in World War II, which earned him a Bronze Star. So he is a true hero. He was born in 1919, which makes him 95 years old. He has authored 23 books and is now working on book number 24. He has given over 400 speeches regarding Oshkosh, Oshkosh Corporation, and other historical interests. He's been married for 43 years. He has 3 stepchildren, 8 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. And he's been an employee out at the Oshkosh Corporation going on 66 years. And quite frankly, I could sit here with the resume this guy has. I could sit here for the rest of the hour and go over that, but you don't want to sit and listen to me talk. So at this time, I'm hoping you can help me welcome Clarence, Inky Jungwirth. Inky, thank you very much for sitting down and talking to us.
Maybe the first thing I should explain is why I'm called Inky.
Yeah, sure.
Growing up in the Bloody 6th Ward, which was a ghetto, a German Catholic ghetto, when I was a kid, there was a large children's population because the average family size in the 6th Ward, because of the Catholic faith, was around 15 kids per family. Yeah. And so there were hundreds of kids, and it was a condition that if you didn't have a nickname in the 6th Ward, you were considered a sissy. And actually, I was always been short of stature. And one of the guys, the older guys in the neighborhood, started calling me incubator baby because of my size compared to the rest of the kids in the neighborhood. And they soon got tired of saying incubator baby, and it just went into the word Inky after all because that was short. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people think in Oshkosh the fact that I work at Oshkosh Truck as an engineer, that they sort of connect me with ink and drawings at Oshkosh Truck, but actually the incubator baby was termed Inky because of the size that I have. That's where the name materialized. It's surprising. Everybody had a nickname. It was usually based on some characteristic. For example, we had a Pinky because his eyes were pink. The tallest guy in the neighborhood, who happened to be a policeman, was called Tiny. And this is an emphasis of how you got your nickname. Mm-hmm. One of my best friends was called Corky. His name was George. Now he got Corky, I don't know. But usually it was some characteristics that you had, a physical characteristics, or some of your, how should I say it, Norbert, instead of saying Norbert, they say Norb. Mm-hmm. And my brother Bob, who used to be on
Mayor,
the city council, he was known in the neighborhood as Big Dome, because by his relation to his body size, his head was larger than normal, so they called him Big Dome. See, and this was characteristic of all the nicknames.
Okay.
And I never,
Well, Inky, you mentioned the Bloody Sixth, and we're going to get into that in depth a little bit later.
Okay.
What street did you? I mean, what street did you grow up on?
I grew up on, I was born on 9th Street, and at that time, the house numbers have changed. It would be opposite where the Franklin School is today, was, the old Franklin School. It'd be opposite on 9th Street. And the old Franklin School was on 6th Street. And I was born on 9th Street, and then my parents bought the house on 6th Street a couple of years after I was born.
Okay. All right.
Tell us a little about your life as a child in your home. What was the homestead like?
You know, it's lucky I'm here. This is the story of 9th Street. We had a rain cistern. And the rain cistern was a characteristic of all the homes in the neighborhood. And what had happened, what the purpose of a rain cistern was the pipes alongside the roof would take the rainwater and drain it into the rain cistern, mm-hmm. and that your mother would use that water for washing dishes, and that's called soft water. Rainwater or soft water, and that's what that could make soap suds to do it that way.
Okay.
And on 9th Street, we had a rain cistern that had a cover on it. All the rain cisterns had a cover on it, so they could clean it out. And my mother tells me that I had two characteristics. I had the habit of sitting. 9th Street had streetcar tracks.
Yeah.
I had a habit of sitting on the streetcar tracks.
That's a bad habit, Inky.
It was a bad habit. She told me that a lot of the times she had to run out and watch me. If she didn't keep an eye on me, I would sit on the railroad track, on the streetcar tracks. She'd have to pick me up and pull me off before the streetcar come. Then when I must have been about 1 year old or 2 years old, and started to walk. And one time she couldn't find me, and she went over the neighborhood looking for me. And she went to the neighbor to help her look for me. And what made the neighbor look in the rain cistern, I had opened the door of the rain cistern, fell in, the door closed, and I had overalls, and my overall strap caught on a nail that was sticking in the rain cistern.
Wow.
And I was starting to go, my mother told me that I was starting to go down the third time, and it's a miracle why the neighbor looked in that rain cistern, and she opened the door, grabbed me by the hair, and pulled me out. Otherwise, I would be gone.
How old were you when that happened?
I must have been about 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah.
I was walking, and I'd be able to crawl around, things like that. So to talk about a miracle.
Yeah. So what did you do, when you were a kid? What did you do? You were born in 1919. When you're, 10, 15 years old, give us a day in the life of Inky when he was a kid.
In the neighborhood, due to the large number of kids, and by that time, by the time I was able to be and 7, 8 years old, we had moved to 6th Street, which is right across the street from Franklin School. And there being a large neighborhood with a lot of kids, we kids played together every day. And the Franklin School had a lot of playground on each side of the school. And we played games, kids. We made scooters out of roller skates. We played cowboys and Indians. We made guns. We had guns where we would take a block of wood, put a clothespin on it, and put a rubber band on it, and play cowboy and Indians. And so a rubber band, if you shot the rubber band on the guy, he was dead. See? We kids made our own games. We did our own thing. That's what we did. And that was the nature of the neighborhood, because being from the 6th Ward, we were ostracized by the city of Oshkosh. We were considered the scum of the city of Oshkosh, being in the 6th Ward. We were German descendants from German people, and people in Oshkosh don't realize that me born in 1919, that was after the end of World War I, where the German ancestry was looked down on as having started World War I. And that was a suspicion in the neighborhood that these Germans are a little odd.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of animosity against the Catholic Germans. There was animosity against the Catholics. That was part of the culture of America in the 19th century and the early parts of the 20th century. And we were looked down on as the scum of the city.
Yeah.
And so we sort of played an isolated role in the city as far as culture is concerned, as far as going downtown or going to the theaters and things like that. We were sort of isolated. So we made our own fun.
Sure.
And we did that. And this was common in the city of Oshkosh at that particular time in the early parts of the 20th century. The Russians on the west side were looked down on it because they were Russian. And the Polish on the northeast side of Oshkosh were looked down on. But you have to know the culture of the United States of America in the early part of the 20th century. If you were from a foreign country, you were our ancestor from your parents were German or Polish or from a different country. This was part of the culture of America in that particular time.
Right.
You were not the Daughters of the American Revolution as a primary example. That was a big society because they were the first, you might say, the first citizens of the United States. And people in America don't realize that the animosity to foreign immigrants in America was tremendous. The Irish is a prime example. They settled in New York City, and they were considered scum.
Yeah.
And this was true if you weren't born in America, you were considered foreign,
Second-class citizen.
second-class citizen. And
You mentioned a lot of these German families obviously were quite large. So I'm assuming you had several siblings. So
that's right. In my family, I only had a brother and a sister. I had a brother Bob and a sister Grace. Why my mother didn't have more kids, I can't tell you. I don't know. I don't understand. But the average family size in the 6th Ward of Oshkosh, from my investigation, from writing my bloody 6th Ward book, the average family size would be 15 kids.
you're definitely on the smaller size of the family.
That's
considered.
right. You see, being Catholic, there was no birth control.
Right.
That was considered a moral sin.
Right.
I'll do it that way. And
Right.
no birth control. That was the reason.
Inky, how do you remember Oshkosh when you were a kid? And then just briefly talk about that and then compare and contrast it to now.
Comparing the past to the present, we were sort of isolated in the 6th Ward because of our Catholic heritage, because of our status as far as working conditions were. our dads, all the men in the sixth ward worked. My grandparents worked at Payne's. They were low-level paying jobs. We were poor people. We had homes that were poor. We couldn't afford luxuries, things of that nature. So it was a sort of, I consider it a ghetto existence. That's the impression I have carried with me all my life, that my life as a kid was a ghetto existence compared to the ghetto life today that other groups today suffer in America.
What would have been a luxury?
Luxury would have been, I consider a luxury, for example, a Christmas present that I got one time. A luxury was a pair of boots with a pocket knife in it. I thought that was the greatest present I got. That'll give you an idea of what, I think Christmas time in the sixth ward would be an example of what luxuries were. Because I remember candles on the Christmas tree instead of electric light bulbs.
Yeah.
And I vaguely remember not even having electric lights in my house on 6th Street. And I can remember that we used candles, we used kerosene lamps
Wow.
and things. That is a type of existence we had, I remember as a kid, to do it that way.
Right.
That way.
Now, you ended up going into the military. When did you go? When did you come back? And where were you deployed?
The reason I went in the military, the way that you had to have the kids in the sixth ward, most of the kids in the sixth ward went to Sacred Heart School for their education out of kindergarten.
Yep.
They went to the Franklin School for kindergarten. Then you had, by church law, you had to go to a Catholic school. So second, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. And you had to go through the eighth grade to school. And that would be at Sacred Heart School, which was founded, I was born in 1919. So Sacred Heart School started in 1903 is when Sacred Heart Church was founded. And the first pastor we had at Sacred Heart Church in 1903 was Father Schmitz. And his first concern was to educate the kids in the Catholic faith. So before he built the church, he built the school on the corner of 5th and Knapp Street, which was on the lower floor, and the upper floor was a church. Mm-hmm. He did. That's what he started off with. He started when he came. Father Reverend Schmitz, he was an old-time pastor, and he ruled that parish, that Catholic parish, with an iron fist.
Right.
And it was, but that's where us kids in the sixth ward, most of us were Catholic, had to go to Sacred Heart School, and we were taught by nuns. And I talk to kids today when I give lectures about my education, and I tell them what we went through being taught by nuns, and they were very, very strict because that was the culture that we early Catholics were brought up from.
Right.
In other words, in a sense, the voice of Father Schmitz and the voice of the nuns were the voice of God. And you had to behave or do what they told you. And for example, in school, the sisters could hit you because that was the culture of the time. And when I talk to kids today in my talks, when I tell them that a sister can hit you, today they'd be hauled down to the police station. But they don't realize that was the culture of the time. That if you got a licking in school and you got home and told them you got a licking by your sister, you got another licking. A feature of all the Catholic homes in the sixth ward, it was a leather strap. This strap was made either out of shaving strap, strapping, or either your father made a strap that was rolled up leather that would be about 12 inches long, and it was nothing for him to put you over his lap
Sure.
and spank you. And this was the culture of spanking back in the early part of the 20th century was a form of discipline that would be not accepted today.
Right, right.
But in that culture, back in the early part of the 20th century, that was accepted. Wife beating was accepted. We had a woman in the Sixth Ward that her husband beat her so bad and that he distorted her face
Oh, my Lord.
that she never would come out she wouldn't come out during the day. She would only come out at night. But the laws of that time, in the early part of the 20th century, favored the husband.
Gosh, that's horrible. Wow.
But that was terrible, yeah.
Wow. We got one more question, Inky, and then we're going to take a break.
Yeah.
You authored several books. Just take a couple minutes and what did you author? I mean, what was the theme or the, you know?
You know, it's strange. I retired in 1987 from Oshkosh truck. I'm a walker, and I do a lot of walking, and it so happened that I meditate. I'm a strict Catholic. I meditate on my religion. I meditated, and one day, when I had moved into the town of Algoma in the 1970s, after I retired from truck, it's like a bolt of lightning struck me. Why don't you? I don't know where the thought came from.
Right.
It's from the meditation, and a bolt of lightning struck me. Why don't I write about my childhood
Right.
and where I was brought up? And I wrote the history of the bloody Sixth Ward because that was such a prominent part of my life, of my upbringing, and things of that. And the success, I went down to Kinko's, we're on Wisconsin Avenue at the time, and they had a sale on. And I said, I had typed it on a typewriter. I had taken typing in high school. Why I took typing in high school was a miracle, because for a boy to take typing in my
Yeah.
generation,
Yeah.
you were considered a sissy.
Right.
Now, why I took typing, I had taken a business course in high school. Now I should backtrack. Why did I go to high school when the eighth grade education was considered sufficient enough? Because you went to work at the age of 12, 13, and 14. There wasn't, even though the state law said you had to go to school till you were 16, that was ignored in the poor neighborhoods. And my mother insisted I go to high school. She saw something in me that I didn't know I had. And she insisted that I go. And of course, it was a sin that, according to the Catholic faith, it was a sin just to pay your parents. And so I went to high school because I would have had to go to confession. I was just to pay my parents. So being obedient Catholic and obeying my parents, I went to high school. And that's where I got the education in high school that taught me. And I got inspired in high school, even though I come from a ghetto district. I was sort of a loner in high school. The only friends I had in high school were a farm boy and another kid from the east side. They come from a ghetto type area too. But the fact that I was from the Sixth Ward, I was considered scum.
Right.
In fact, I never attended any social functions in high school because I was considered an outsider.
Yeah.
And that was common for people from the Sixth Ward to do it that way.
Okay, well, with that, Inky, we're going to take a break. Stay with us. When we return, we're going to learn what the Bloody Sixth Ward was, and we're going to talk about Inky's book, The Bloody Sixth Ward. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
On the surface, the simple pleasures in life are going on all around us. But inches beneath the surface, utility lines are carrying electricity, gas, and more to your home. Digger's Hotline helps avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. It doesn't matter how deep you're digging, Call 811 or click diggershotline.com 3 working days before you start your project, and we'll help take the risk out of digging. Protect your simple pleasures. Know what's below.
There is a place where history is captured in time, where the voices of past generations still discuss the days of success, of love, hope, and joy. Timeless, playful,
Welcome to my attic.
memorable. The Oshkosh Public Museum. Come for the sights, stay for the memories.
Hello and welcome back to Oshkosh Diaries. Paul Esslinger with Derek Kloiber. We're sitting down talking with Inky Jungwirth. And as I alluded to before we took the break, Inky did author a book, History of the Bloody Sixth Ward in the city of Oshkosh. And so with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the Bloody Sixth Ward. There's several chapters in the book, and I just wrote down 4 of them, and we'll talk about those, Inky. As you know, the first one was the high holders. First of all, where is the Bloody Sixth Ward, and who lived there?
Yeah, the Bloody Sixth Ward, the boundaries of the Bloody Sixth Ward. Originally, there were only 3 wards in the city. As the immigrants poured into the city of Oshkosh, they moved the best parts of the city of Oshkosh were north of the Fox River. The south side of the Fox River was mostly marshland. There was a lot of swamps. In fact, the city dumps were on the south side of the river originally. And that's where the early immigrants settled in the poorer sections of the city of Oshkosh. They filled in the swampy land that we filled in, and the homes were cheap to build. Lumber was cheap in Oshkosh because Oshkosh was a lumber town, and lumber was you could build a house for $300, $400, $500, $600. The houses were small, and the Sixth Ward, the boundaries of the Sixth Ward that developed originally from the three wards that were part of the city that started in 1853 was developed as the early immigrants came in. They developed the Fifth Ward from the Fourth Ward, and the Fifth Ward and the Sixth Ward. And the Sixth Ward was bounded by Minnesota Street on the east and the river. On the south to the middle of 9th Street, all the wards were bounded into the middle of the streets. So the south boundary of the Sixth Ward would have been the middle of 9th Street, and the west boundary would have been Knapp Street, and which was west of Knapp Street. There was mostly farmland at the time. And then they would go up to Sawyer Avenue, up to where Zion Lutheran Church is today. That would be the north boundary. And the east boundary would have been Minnesota Street and the Fox River. Do it that way. That would be the boundaries of the wards, the thing.
Now, the term high holder, I oddly enough know this, but for those viewers who don't know what it is, what is a high holder, and where did that name come from?
Now, in Germany, there were 2 versions of people. They called a language the High German and Low German language. And they think that was the reason for the high holders. But my research indicates that the Milwaukee-St. Paul Railroad ran from Ohio Street, ran through the 6th Ward, out towards Armo and out to Berlin and Ripon. The women in the 6th Ward, the heritage of those people were farmers from Germany, Czechoslovakia, Austria, wherever they come. The farming community was the basis of our heritage from our great-grandparents, and our grandparents originally were born into farming community in Germany. The city of Oshkosh permitted farms, barns on your property. You could have a barn, you could have a cow, and you could have hay to feed the cow. You could have all kinds of things that would not be allowed today. But in those days you could because of the farming background of the early German immigrants, and these are other immigrants too that come from Europe to do it. So these barns, you could milk your cows, but to get the hay, for example, on 4th Street, there would be a German settled on 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th Street. I'm talking to the middle of 9th Street now. And what they would do, they would take wheelbarrows and go to what was now South Park, which was nothing but a hayfield. And they would cut hay and call the hay back to their barns to feed their cattle. And when the Milwaukee-St. Paul trains went through, the trainmen would see the women with the wheelbarrows of the farmers, and they would indicate, they would stop the train in those days, that was common. And they would ask the women what they were doing. And my research indicated that the women would say, they would, in a mixture of German and English, they would say they're hauling hay. Because, in other words, the high holder background, in my estimation, come from the words the hay haulers. And the term, now the women are speaking in half German, half English. You can see
So very hard to understand.
Very hard to understand. And it eventually got transformed into high holder because there was an English version. In fact, the high holder restaurant on the corner of 5th and Knapp Street was called the High Holder Restaurant.
Yeah.
And I am convinced that that is the background of the term high holder. And in the city of Oshkosh, the term high holder meant the scum Catholics from the south side of the city of Oshkosh. That's my estimation of the history of the term high holder from what I could gather.
Okay, well, this next, what we're going to ask you next is, for me, absolutely fascinating. In your book, if we can put up the names, Ian, in the book you have the names of the people that predominantly lived in the Bloody Sixth Ward, many, many German people, and you have the names on there, and the meanings of the names were, I found it really fascinating. And one of them in particular is very near and dear to our co-host, Derek Kloiber, with his last name of Kloiber. Do you remember what the meaning of Kloiber is?
I'd have to look in the book.
Okay, well, I got it here. It is one who gathers or picks up things.
Yep, that's right, yeah. There is to understand the names of the German people and the immigrants to a community, especially in Wisconsin, you have to understand that when the immigrants came to America, when they came through immigration in New York or in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, where they disembark, the immigration agents would write it down, the name phonetically. There's a lot of misspelling in the German names because my grandparents didn't speak. My grandpa, on my mother's side, he never wanted to learn English.
Yeah.
The German characteristic back in the 18th century and 19th century was predominantly very stubborn. Stubbornness.
A stubborn German? I've never heard of that. Yeah. I'm German. I'm certainly not stubborn.
That's a characteristic of the German people of the thing. I'm a student of the Middle Ages, and I understand the background of the German people, why they were, and I understand my grandparents' background, why it was difficult for them to learn. For example, my grandpa, on my mother's side, always wanted to go back to Germany. And there was a lot of immigrants that came to America back in the 19th century. They came to America because they thought the streets were paved with gold. They would make a killing, make their money, and go back to their old country.
Sure.
That's common. That's what the American people don't understand, that a lot of immigrants that came here in the 19th century thought they'd come to America, make a fortune, go back home. What changed the tactic was World War I.
Certainly.
That changed everything.
Yeah.
And I go back to the immigrants when they came to this country at the start of the 20th century. A lot of them didn't want to give their German spelling of their name because they would be the animosity towards from my study of history. I got a history background. My study of the immigrants had an awful time coming into this country, like the Irish did. We were considered the scum of Europe. In fact, there was a at one time in the United States there was a prohibition trying to pass laws prohibiting Europeans of certain types of coming to the United States of America, like the Mexican people have a problem
Right.
today,
Now, yeah.
and that was a problem. And the word got back to the people in Germany that if you come to America, you better not spell your name in German. So a lot of them, for example, Jungwirth, my German spelling in German is Jungwirth, and that means in German young innkeeper. Jung is young, Wirth is innkeeper. Now, when they came into the immigration officers in the United States, they would spell it. You will find spelling in the phone book of Jungwirth, and some of the spelling is Yungwirth.
Right.
See, it was an English version. They didn't want people to know because of the harassment that they would receive in the community. And this has been common throughout the United States.
Okay, we got a million things to talk about here, Inky. We could probably do on 3 or 4 shows. I just want to talk about some of these other names that I think are popular, and I'll just, kind of blurt these out. Drexler, one who turned a lathe. Grable, a dweller near a ditch or a gully. Neubauer, new farmer or recently settled villager. Schrader, one who made garments, a tailor. Stadler, one who lives near a barn, one who came from Stadel in Germany. And Troxel, one who fashioned objects on a lathe or turner. And there's a lot of these names in here. And first of all, is this book still available yet,
It's
Inky?
still available. It's still available. I sell it directly. It's available at the public library.
Okay,
It's available.
to review. Otherwise, Inky, his name is Clarence. He is in the phone book. I would highly recommend, if you have any interest in Oshkosh, if you don't have this book, you need to get it. Let's move on, Inky. Nicknames. My dad was one of 11 kids. Every kid in his family had a nickname.
Right.
And Ian, if you can put on the nicknames that we have, there we go. Again, just a ton of nicknames. Just give us a couple nicknames.
Pink Eye is one. Hamble is another one. Blood Eye. Blood Eye is a name. And that his name he couldn't pronounce. He had a pronunciation problem. And he was called Blood Eye. And try to spell it. What does it mean?
Right.
Nothing. It's,
Well, here's one I see that I recognize, Ticker.
Ticker Reichenberger.
Reichenberger, yeah.
Reichenberger. Why he got the name Ticker, I don't know.
Cheesebox.
Juice box, I don't know.
Some of these are just absolutely bizarre. Porky, I guess, probably. Little Caesar.
Little Caesar, yeah. That was Gene Steckbar, who was vice president of the bank of Oshkosh Bank.
Oh, so he was a big shot, so he's going to be. Okay, and you got Dumpling, Punky, Sparky, Skunky. Who was Skunky?
Skunky, I'm trying to think. Skunky, how he got the name, I don't know. I knew he was a friend he hung around in the neighborhood. My brother Bob, who was a mayor of this town, as a kid, he was called Big Dome because his head was, relative to his body size, was a bit larger than the normal person would have.
So I'm sure he was really appreciative
He
of people
really,
calling him.
yeah, it didn't bother Bobby at
Oh,
all.
it didn't? Okay.
It didn't bother him at all.
Now, some of these nicknames, did this cause some scuffles to.
Didn't make a difference. If you didn't, in my appreciation of life in the Sixth Ward, if you didn't have a nickname, you were a sissy. So you appreciated your name.
Yeah.
It didn't bother you. What in those days, you were lucky you could live in America.
Well, on that note, I know a girl by the name of Karina, and I've been around nicknames all my life too. And I started calling her Corey, just short for Karina.
Yeah.
And I think she took offense to it first. She said, "Why are you calling me Corey?" I said, "It's just my German background, I guess." So I just, and I said, "Trust me, if you have a nickname, you're liked. Someone likes you, and they want to be around you, and you're a swell, I guess."
In my generation, a nickname was a form of affection. Nick, in the English language, means to cut. That was the original meaning of the word Nick in the English language. In England, for example, the word Nick was mean to cut, but that meaning lost its meaning when you come to America and the immigrant groups, because you were isolated to begin with.
Right. Okay, I think we covered that. Talk to us about the Prohibition years in the Bloody Sixth.
The Prohibition years were the most popular period in the economy in the Sixth Ward. A pint of whiskey would cost $1. Now, $1 back during the Prohibition years in the 20s, the dollar was worth a lot of money. A pint of whiskey would think. People in America started Prohibition right after World War I. After World War I. They don't realize that booze was prominent in America from the day the Pilgrims, when they came to land at Plymouth Rock, they had a ship full of rum. And from that day forward, people aren't aware of the Whiskey Rebellion under the period of during the American Revolution. The Whiskey Rebellion, because whiskey was a way of life. And people don't realize when they study Prohibition that the water for drinking water was contaminated with all types of bacteria. The only safe drink you could really take care of was something with alcohol in it. Beer, rum. Rum was a big business in the United States back in the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century. And the people that were for Prohibition were, how should I say it? They believed, and their belief is a valid belief. I respect their belief. They believed that alcohol was evil, that had to be eliminated. Mm-hmm. And if you study the early history of the United States, the government tried to stop the production of whiskey, and it was a hopeless cause. The Whiskey Rebellion back in the early part of the history of the United States was a flop. The government tried to tax it, and you had in Tennessee and Kentucky and all that, there was whiskey was being made, and they will never think. And I tell people, and even though I don't mean to condemn people that believe in abstinence, I tell them that Christ's first miracle was to make wine at a wedding.
So
Now you take it from there.
Was there a lot of bootlegging and such going on?
There was a lot of bootlegging. If you look at the city directory when the Prohibition law was passed, not 19th Amendment?
Yes.
The 19th Amendment?
Yep.
If you look in the city directory that year, the year before the 19th Amendment passed, you'll find probably about 120 taverns. The year Prohibition appeared, you'll find about 120 soft drink parlors. If you don't believe me, go and look in the city directories at the public library and you'll see the thing. The pop was sold on top of the bar and the booze was sold underneath. prohibition will never work. Will never work. It will never work.
So it was illegal, obviously, during Prohibition. We had a police force in Oshkosh at that time.
And I tell, from my experience, knowing the police as a teenage boy, the police didn't arrest anybody because their own parents were making it. If you know any history of the police department, that I know, I can't remember all the names of the policemen, but I knew their parents were making and selling it.
So this is a law that really, by and large, in Oshkosh,
The booze was a big production, especially in the poor sections of the city of Oshkosh. And I think, in my belief, the Sixth Ward was the largest producer of booze in the city of Oshkosh because of their German heritage. People don't realize that in Europe, drinking of alcoholic drinks was part of the heritage because of the water supply. They think right away they think that it's due to a illness or a disease or whatever you think. They don't realize that the culture, and that's the problem with American history. They don't go back into the European history in the Middle Ages to find out that the only safe to drink was something with alcohol in it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you go into Egyptian culture or the Mesopotamian culture. It's been from
well, it had to be pasteurized.
Right. So.
What types of recreation went on in the 60s? I know I heard something about hockey was kind of a thing, but what other types of recreation?
The Franklin School had 2 large lots on each side of the school. One school was made into a hockey rink, and hockey became one of the largest sports in the poorer sections of the city of Oshkosh. It was a game played by kids, teenage boys, especially teenage boys, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22 years old. Oshkosh had 2 hockey teams that were formed on the south side in the Franklin School. One was an amateur hockey team called the Yellow Jackets, which is in the Sixth Ward book. And then guys, you've heard of the name of Porky Pensenstaller and Bob Kinderman, who was an excellent hockey player. He played in the Sixth Ward on a team at the Franklin School. He was offered a chance to play with the Blackhawks in Chicago. He was that good. The hockey teams in the city of Oshkosh during the poor times in the city of Oshkosh was a big attraction, and the Franklin School made a hockey rink. They had boards, hockey boards. They made cages. They made the stuff themselves. And there would be maybe, during a hockey game, the city of Oshkosh put up lights for the hockey rink back in the 30s and 40s. There would be, during a hockey game, they would play. Wausau had the best hockey teams. And those teams would come down, and I can't remember the other cities, but there was a sort of inter-city rivalry between the hockey teams that developed between the other immigrant groups. They would come to Oshkosh, and hockey had some excellent hockey players, Porky Pensenstaller, Jojo Pensenstaller, and I could go on, Norm Merkus. And in fact, the best hockey team in Oshkosh was called the Yellow Jackets, and the picture is in my History of the Bloody Sixth Ward book, and they were good. These guys that played on hockey were working already, and they would drive, in the hockey season, they would drive up to Wausau to play a hockey team, come back at night, and go back to work the next morning without any sleep. They were that good.
Well, your brother Bob was, quite good, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a hockey player. He was good at it.
He was a baseball player too, wasn't he?
He was a baseball player. One thing about the hockey players, today you worry about helmets, masks, and all that. That was considered to be sissy. For shin guards, they would take newspapers and put them in their woolen stockings. That would be their shin guards because they couldn't afford anything. They lucky they could afford a hockey stick. But hockey played a large part in the winter, especially in the wintertime, in the city of Oshkosh, especially on the south side. They played a tremendous entertainment value for the people of the city they lived in, the Sixth Ward especially. There would probably be, I can still visualize the hockey games, and I'll bet there was about 200 or 300 people standing along the sideboards watching the hockey, because it was a rough game, and it was exciting to watch. And those guys played like professionals.
Yeah.
They played.
Where did football fit into the whole
And
equation?
football didn't fit into the scheme of things on the south side because of lack of a stadium or a field where you could play football. There was an empty lot on the corner of Napth and Idaho Street. They would play makeup games without any protection or nothing, but just rough games. It was more like touch football. There was no heavy tackling or nothing like that to do it, man. Because I can still visualize them playing football, throwing the football. It was tag football, is what it is.
Yeah.
You made your own fun in the immigrant districts in the city of Oshkosh, because you weren't allowed to go any other place at that time in the early part of the 20th century.
Yeah.
So you made your own fun.
Go ahead.
You know, and what the city of Oshkosh did back in the 20s and I would say back in the 30s, especially, the city recreational department in the summertime started a program on the various public schools in Oshkosh. They had interns, the college students, would run entertainment programs in the summertime on the school grounds. During the daytime, they would make up games with the kids. I can remember they would work probably from 9, 10 in the morning. This was during the Depression days. They would work from 9, 10 in the morning to probably 6 or 7 o'clock at night. They would start volleyball games. Different types of games they would pick up. People of Oshkosh today don't realize what provisions the recreational department of Oshkosh started. And the gym on over here, Division Street, I forget the name of the gentleman that ran it at the time, but he was an enthusiast to start recreational programs for the immigrant communities. I don't care if they were on the east side or west side, he did. But I know on the south side, he had a lot of immigrant people that he started games with. He would furnish the equipment. He would furnish baseballs, bats, volleyballs, things of that nature. And they realized that during the Depression days that if you want to keep people quiet and start unrest, keep them occupied.
Yeah.
Sure.
See, it was the philosophy of the city of Oshkosh back during the Depression days, especially, was well researched and well done, but people knew what they were doing.
Right. Well, Inky, we have literally about 4 minutes left, unfortunately. But there's one more topic that I want to talk about that's in your book for the Bloody Sixth Ward, and that's small business, and that had to have been a huge part of the Sixth Ward, correct?
That's right, yeah. The small business, for example, one of the biggest businesses in the Sixth Ward was Schitzel's shoe shop. He didn't have any legs. He had both legs off. I don't know how he did it, but he ran a shoe shop on 9th Street, right, just a couple doors, a couple blocks from my house. He had no legs, but he was an excellent shoe repairman. There was a lot of business run out of the houses in the Sixth Ward. Kinderman Insurance Agency, taverns. The taverns were a big business in the city of Oshkosh, as well as grocery stores. You have to remember that back in the early part of the 20th century, people had to walk wherever they had to go. They didn't have, due to the Depression era, they didn't even have enough money to take a bus to go downtown to shop. So you had, for example, just on my block alone, there was Steckbar's Tavern and Grocery Store, A block back on Fifth Street was Burger's grocery store. Across from it was Bleckle's butcher shop.
Yep.
You see, there was 3 stores just maybe a couple hundred feet apart. And then there was Pollock's grocery store, which was on the 5th and Dakota Street. And then the Keck's grocery store on 9th and 6th. And I could go on and on and on. The Fisher's grocery store on Knapp Street on the corner of 4th and 9th. So people had to walk. So this was a good business for them. And one thing they drummed up business for the business that was on, especially butcher shops, how people survived in the 6th Ward during the Depression, you could run up a charge at the grocery store or at the butcher shop. You could have a bill. They'd make a bill out for you that you would promise to pay. Now, you've got to keep in mind that the philosophy of the 6th Ward was Catholic. And the Catholic theology, if you didn't pay your bill, that was a sin. That was considered stealing. So the merchants that lived in the 6th Ward knew that the Catholic philosophy knew that their paper would bill. My mother ran up a bill of a couple $100 during the Depression. Now that was a lot of money, and she paid off every penny. And if you talked to, of course, all those people are dead now, never understood. But if you talk to those people, the reason they let those people from the 6th Ward especially charge, because they knew that they would get their money back. Because it would be a sin. And if you committed a sin and you had to go to confession before you could go to communion.
Yeah.
See, that was a tremendous power point for people that pay their bills, especially in the Catholic community.
Right.
I'm not saying that other communities, either Lutheran or not, didn't pay their bills, but I know from the Catholic viewpoint, that was a requisite.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Inky, show number 1 is coming to a conclusion. As I stated before, we're going to have you back again for the next show. We're going to talk about World War II, and we're going to talk about Oshkosh Corporation. So with that, Derek and I do have a couple announcements. Derek, you're up first.
All right. Well, Facebook groups are still taking off like wildfire. Oshkosh Diaries on Facebook, where you can find uploads to YouTube of all our shows, as well as comments and feedback from viewers like you. That's Oshkosh Diaries on Facebook. The second group, Oshkosh Memories, up to, I believe, around 660 members. Every show, and keep getting bigger and bigger. So let's try hitting 1,000 in a month here. Okay, so check out Oshkosh Memories and Oshkosh Diaries on Facebook.
Thanks, Derek. And once again, I do want to remind the audience that the Oshkosh Memorabilia Club will be holding their antique appraisal show Saturday, March 29th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. over at the Senior Center. That's the Annex Building. And this year's theme is railroads. We're going to have quite the railroad theme set up. Larry Spanbauer, son Paul, who is now a member of the club, will be there with the setup. Again, we'll be having brewery items, milk, toys, postcards, pictures, yearbooks, Oshkosh Corp. Inky can be there and talk about that. So it'll be a great time. Again, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Saturday, March 29th. So with that, unfortunately, we're out of time, but tune in again next time. We are going to have Inky Jungwirth back to talk about some more stuff. So we hope you can join us at that time. Thanks for watching.
Good night.